I am Edgar Luther Friend, aka Eddie, Ed. This is my life story so far. I started out as a young boy on a farm in Mill Run, Pennsylvania, and the farm life did not really wasn't what I wanted. So I did my best. It was a lot of hard work. My dad, Roy Friend, he worked on the railroad also while he farmed. And this is what made it so difficult for us, was the fact that he come home at night and farmed and always wanted us to do the same thing. And I couldn't wait to get off that farm because of the hard work. I was born in the house that was my parents' home October the 7th, 1927. And we had a midwife. We did not have a doctor. My mother had a midwife. And this is the way all of our family were born. None of us. I had 5 sisters and 1 adopted sister. My first sister, oldest sister, was Thelma, Virginia. And my second sister was Selma Millicent. My third sister was Eloise. I don't know her middle name. And the Winona Dean was my 4th sister, and Vergna Garnett was my 5th sister. And then we adopted Lorene Garnett, which was actually my sister's Eloise baby. But when I came home from school one day, they had brought her home, and she was my sister from then on. Yeah, my brother George Roy, he and I, there was 3 years difference in our ages, and he and I were together all of our time as youngsters. But anyhow, we kind of fell apart there for a little while, but later years we really got close again. Dad would give him the car, and he would go to Laura Lee. It had been sold then. Uncle Billy sold it to Artie Brown. And I would go down there all the time. I would deliver milk down there every evening, and Mom would sell it to them for 10 cents a quart. And I would take 2 quarts down every day, and then at the end of the week, she would give me 10 cents for taking it down. Dad had a Model T to start with, and I don't remember the Model T because I was born 27. In 1929, he bought a new Ford Model A. And this is my first experience with cars, and I loved that car. We'd be going along down the road it would run about 65 mile an hour, and that's the way he ran it, was 65 mile an hour, all the time. And we'd be tilt bobbing down. It had 21-inch wheels. You'd be tilt bobbing down the road, and he'd wave at everybody. Everybody waved at everybody, and about this time he'd go across on the other side of the road, but that was okay. We kept wanting to get a new car. I kept, after him to get a new car, and we looked at several, and he would look at them every year, but he would never buy it. Finally, in 1939, Harry Sparks in Indian Head had a car that had been traded in, a 38 Ford. It was 1 year old. And we bought it, Dad bought it, and paid $425 for it. Well, that's the one that George would always take out. George would get a key made, and when Dad wouldn't give it to him, he would steal it out at night. You could run it out of the garage, push it out of the garage, and then going down through the barnyard, you could get it started, and then put the lights on and go. Well, George did that a lot. Well, one time I thought I would try that, And at the time I was about 14 years old. So I decided to go ahead but George and Vergna were both at Laura Lee that night. And I just thought, well, he's not stealing the car. I'm going to go up and get it. I got up and got that car, and I pushed it out of the garage, got it down to the barnyard, got it going, went down, pulled into Laura Lee, and went in and told George, look what I got out here, He said, boy, you better get that car back home. And I went down to Mill Run, took a couple of girls that were down there for a ride in it, even let one of them drive it, which she couldn't drive any better than I could. There was no adjustment on the seat, and I had to hold on to the steering wheel or I'd fall backwards. Anyhow, I came back up to Laura Lee and seen George again. He said, get that car back home, whatever you do. So I go out the bottom driveway of Laura Lee, and there was a top driveway up on the other end. I turned off my lights and I started up by that driveway, and another car coming the other way didn't see me, and he turned into that driveway and mashed right smack into the front of me, down along the side. He took the front fender, the whole side off of my car, and I just kept going because I thought, boy, I can't stop, you know. And I went on up to my Uncle Clyde's lane, and I pulled in there and got out and looked, and the fender is rubbing the wheel and everything, and I didn't know what to do. So I came on back down, pulled up into the garage, and it made so much noise, I seen the light going in the house. And Dad come out, George, is that you? I didn't answer. I just got out of the car and I took off. And I didn't know what to do. I knew I didn't dare to go into the house. And so I went over to, Dad had built this house on our lot. We had torn down the original falling water building, and we had saved all the lumber. So Dad built this house, and he put Ray King, my sister Dean's husband, had moved in there, Dean and Ray, and they had 10 kids. And they had moved in there, and he'd built a new chicken coop, and there was no chickens in it yet. I went over and slept in that chicken coop all night. The next day, I didn't go to school. Mom's out there yelling for me, and I'm not answering nowhere. She don't know where I'm at. And I didn't go to school. Instead, I had to walk to Bear Run, where I went to school. I went there for 8 years, and it was uphill both ways, a mile and a half. And you're not kidding when I said uphill, because it was. You go uphill and then you get downhill, you know. Same way coming home. Anyhow, I didn't go to school that day. And George had taken the car and took it to Mill Run to catch his school bus. That's the way he got to catch his school bus, because he was going to high school in Connellsville. I got a ride to Mill Run, hitchhiked to Mill Run, got in there. When he kept the car in my Uncle Clyde's garage, I went in there, took the wheel off, put it on a bumper jack, which if it fell on me, it would have been all there would have been to it. And I worked all day on that fender. I got a big old hammer in there, and I pounded all day to get that fender off the wheel, because he drove it down there and was wearing the tire out. And finally, I got to where it was off the wheel. And I got a hitchhike back home that evening, and Dad hadn't come home from work yet. And Mom come out and said, well, I'm just glad you're here. She said, but wait till your dad gets home, you're in trouble. Well, I stayed there, and Dad walked up. He always walked down to the railroad to where he worked. He never drove his truck or anything. He walked down over the hillside of the railroad. He came walking up through the yard, and he had had time to think about it, you know. That night he would have probably killed me, but Dad was an easygoing man. I mean, even that night he wouldn't have probably done anything. But he came up through there and he said, what in the world did you do last night? Did you steal that car out and wreck it? And I said, yeah. Well, he said, I don't know what to do with you, you know. He reached up and he got a wee little branch off the tree there, hit me a couple licks with it, you know, and said, you're not never going to do that again, are you? I said, no way, I'll never do it again. And that was the end of that episode. George wrecked that car a half a dozen times after that. It was a mess. I mean, a bad mess. Dad decided he would buy a 1940 Chevrolet. Now, he bought this about a year old. A guy had gone to the Army and had left it, and you couldn't buy cars then. It was during when the war was on. So we went up to Harry Sparks's and we looked at it, and Dad made the deal on it. George wrecked that car, demolished it, and that was the end of Dad and cars. He wouldn't buy no more cars for a long time. My grandfather was a foreman on the maintenance of way, they fixed the tracks, and that's where my dad worked. He worked for him. But they would have what they called slides on this railroad, where the mud would come down onto the tracks at night when it would rain. So Dad at times would be a night watchman, and he would walk the tracks at night with a little lantern down at his feet. That's all you could see. And he used to tell us how he would rub up against somebody, and it would be a bum. They had bums out there at that time, people that were homeless or whatever because of the war, or I guess before the war. But
during the Depression.
Yeah, during the Depression, yeah. And he said a lot of times he would brush somebody, but they never bothered him. He never seen their faces or anything. And then he had a little watch box that he would go into, and he could call and tell, if anything happened, and they'd stop the train. And he said he would go into this watch box, and there'd be somebody in there. He'd have to root him out of there so he could call, And he did this for several years too, which is a job that I wouldn't want to know part of. But he kind of liked that, and he did that a lot. Whenever I was going to school at Bear Run, Dad had been laid off the railroad for a little while. So Kaufman, E.J. Kaufman, that had Kaufman's department stores in Pittsburgh, had what they now call Falling Water. But at that time it was just a summer home at Bear Run there. And it was a great big mansion type building down there. And Dad wasn't doing anything, and he asked Dad if he would like to tear this house down and take the lumber. And Dad said yes, he would like to do that. So Dad worked every day, all day long on that house, tearing it down. I mean, it was a large house, and all kinds of windows and doors and beautiful stuff in it. And he would work during the day. Then in the evening, George and I would go and we would help him, and we would pound out the nails. We took the nails out of every board because we were going to build another house with this here. And we had Ray King, my sister's husband. He had an old truck, and he hauled all this lumber back to the farm. And when we got it tore down, they eventually built Falling Water there, and right below where this house was. But we tore it completely down, and I would watch the building of Falling Water from when I was going to school, because we could go up and we could go anywhere in that. Kaufman owned all the forest around there, around behind the school, and we had just acres that we could play back in them woods. We would go down and watch them building this Falling Water, and we would also, they had a swimming pool down there, and the girls would come up from Pittsburgh and swim in that swimming pool, and some of them didn't wear bathing suits. So you may want to edit this, and we would lay up on the ground and watch them girls. We had quite a time in those woods. We would play out in those woods all of our dinner hour, and then we would play on the school ground. We would play ball, and we would play handy over, which was you would take the ball and you would throw it up over top of the schoolhouse. You'd holler handy over, and the people on the other side would know it was coming, and they would, if they could catch it, they would come around and try to get you out before you moved. You never knew when they were going to come around. There's eight grades there, and at this school, and this is what made it a good learning process. Is from the time you were in first grade to eighth, you heard everything. You could learn eighth grade and the first grade because one room and one teacher. The teachers taught all eighth grades. And it was nice because by the time you got to eighth grade, you knew everything that was going to be given to you, The Depression did not affect us that much at all. We had everything that we could eat on the farm. We thought we were poor, but boy, we were wealthy when it come down to what some people had at that time, because we never went hungry. Mom made butter and sold butter. We sold milk. We had cows, and it was a good time actually for us, because we had a garden, and then we had what you call a truck patch, which was a great big garden. We had very little money, but we didn't need it. No, how Dad ever kept going with taxes and building all them buildings and everything, I'll never know. I didn't give him much credit for it at the time, but now I look back and think, my gosh, what he must have gone through. And he loved horses. Dad loved horses, and he always wanted horses. I hated horses, and I do this day. I do not care for horses at all. And he loved them horses, and I wanted to get a tractor, and there's no way that he would get a tractor till after I got out of the service. And finally in 1949, I told him I would farm if he bought a tractor, and he bought a tractor. But I didn't last long on that either. But I have to tell you about an episode that we had with those horses. Now, George must have been probably about 12 or 13, and I was 3 years younger. We were going up to Grandpa's farm on a Sunday evening, and to get corn fodder. After they take the corn out of it, then you've got fodder, and you put it all in sheaves. Now, we had on our wagons, you had a hay rigging or you had a box, and you could transfer it. You could make these wagons into anything you wanted to. You had to take the box off and put the hay rigging on. You had to make it longer and everything else, but we had all the stuff to do that. Anyhow, this night we left the box on. We didn't go for the hay rigging, which we should have done to haul this corn fodder. We went up to Grandpa's and we got a big load on a corn fodder on there. I mean high. It was way up above, probably 10, 15 sheaves high, way above the ground, And on this box, and it was pretty, it would sway up there. George and I got on the top, and Dad sat up in the front, and he had the lines for the horses up on top. And we started down the main road to come down to our place. Well, we had Pearl, the old horse, and one of her colts, younger colts. Dad broke his own horses. He would break them and get them to where he could put them in harness. And they had just put this colt into harness. We started down the road, and as we started down, he left them run a little bit. Well, it was downhill, and that wagon got to going really fast, and them horses couldn't hardly keep ahead of it. And one of the single trees, which you hooked the lines on, the traces onto, it came loose and started hitting this colt on the back. Now, and that spooked her. As the single tree hit the colt, she tried to get away, and this wagon was going at such a pace you would not believe. Dad went down over the front, holding on to the lines. At last we seen him, he went down over the front with this thing going as fast as it was going, and he was gone. So we was up there, and this thing is swaying from side to side. Next thing we knew, there was a guard fence down at the bottom of this hill after we'd passed Uncle Clyde Friend's lane, and we're still going as fast as we can go. And one horse went on one side of that guard fence and one went on the other side, and the wagon hit it. And we stopped abruptly right now, and the corn fodder all went over one side, down in a big gully, George and I underneath it. And whenever we crawled out from there, neither one of us was hurt. We crawled out from under there. The horses were gone. The wagon was sitting there up against the guard post. Dad is nowhere to be found. We got out and we stood there for a little while, and finally a car came down, and they had Dad in the car, and he's bleeding all over. He had went down over the front of that wagon, and it had straddled him, and he had mashed his head on the road, but they was taking him to the hospital. And about this time, Mom come running up the road, because it was only just, maybe a quarter of a mile down the road to our place. And she's crying, saying, "What happened? What happened?" I said, "Well, how'd you know something?" She said, "The horses came home." "But where's Dad?" We said, "They took him to the hospital, Well, he was all right. Dad used to say in later years, if anything ever happens to my mind, you'll know what happened, because I really banged my head on that road. But he was fine. There was no problem with that. Mom would say, the first thing she'd say, "You're going to be the death of me yet?" But I better tell you about this story. Start with my granddad, Albert Sipe Friend. He had 3 children. It was my dad, Clyde, my dad Roy, Clyde, and Jesse. And then they had another baby. But when this other baby was born, his wife died when she was born. So my dad was only just a few years old. So he never had a mother. My Aunt Liddy, which was Albert's sister raised Dad and the other kids. That she was with them the whole time. She never got married, and she lived with Albert there and raised these kids. I have no idea what they paid for these farms. The one that Uncle Clyde had, it had about 80 acres. Then my granddad moved, he sold to this Uncle Clyde. My granddad moved up on east of him on an 80-acre farm up there. Then that's whenever Dad bought 65 acres off of Grandpap down where he built his place. But it was all wooded. He had to do all the building and everything his own. He sawed them trees down by hand. Two men would get on one end of the saw and one the other, and they sawed all them trees down. They pulled the stumps out, and that's how they made the ground to farm on. And we never did have a whole lot of farming ground, but every once in a while he would clear another field, you know, and that's what's called new ground. And we'd have to take the stones off every year because they just come up out of that ground. You could take them off one day and they'd be back the next. They just come right up out of the ground. You never seen so many rocks in all your life, and most of it was hilly. I mean, it was poor farm ground, really poor farm ground. We grew corn, wheat, oats, buckwheat, and mostly then hay. We had a lot of hay. We used it. We used all what we had. We fed the corn to the horses and cows. We had probably at a time we had 10, 15 cows, and had these horses, and we used it all ourselves. We sold very little of it. I don't think we sold any of it. And whenever it came time to harvest, you always had all the farmers around. They would come and help do this, and then Mom would make a big dinner, and they would all eat, and that's how they got paid for coming and helping you. Now, I'll go back to another thing. My middle name is Luther. How I got that name, my grandmother's brother, Luther Lynch, he was a roamer. And from the time that my mom named me that, she said, I know I made a mistake, because Luther was on the go all the time. They never seen him at home. This is what happened with me. It came true. I would hitchhike to Connellsville. Me and another guy would hitchhike to Connellsville, and we would go see a Western movie. He would pay for it. I never had any money. But this other kid, Duty Shorier, he would say, come on and go with me, and I'll pay for it. So he would do that. And then when we would come out, he would take me across the street to Chris Jim's, and we would get a sundae. Boy, that was a treat for me. He had enough money he could do that. I don't know where he got his money, because they were poor people too. He always had a little bit of money. We hitchhiked to Connellsville, and we seen a movie with all these cowboys in Texas. And when we got out of there, I said something about, man, I would love to go to Texas. He said I would too, and there was three of us. There was three of us together, and we said, well, let's hop a freight and go to Texas. We had T-shirts on. It was in the fall of the year. That's all we had was the T-shirts and our jeans on, and no money. I think we had 36 cents between us. We went down to the railroad and waited for the freight trains to come through. And as they come up to you, it looks like they're going slow, but as they went, now these were old steam engines, and they were pulling out of Connellsville going towards Pittsburgh. And as they pulled up there, you had to kind of watch it, and it looked like it was going slow, but boy, you get up there and try to grab a hold of it, they're going pretty darn fast. Well, the first guy, he was a big tall guy. He grabbed on the handle of one of the cars, and up he went. Now the second guy comes along, he's about my size, and he got on. Now it's up to me. Boy, I'm standing there and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm not sure. And finally I grabbed the handle, it threw me back against the side of the car, but I held on and up I went, and all three of us were on there. We started down the road. This steam engine, we was only about 4 or 5 cars back from the steam engine. All them cinders are getting on us. I mean, we're just getting black back there. It just came down over top of us. Our T-shirts are black, There were faces, I mean, it was terrible. So we finally, it pulled over for a siding, and to let another passenger train go by. We got off and we walked back, and there was a flat car with a big spool of wire on it. So we got onto that flat car, and we were back far enough now from the engine that cinders weren't going to bother us. About this time, the brakeman come walking by. And we thought, oh, we're in trouble. He looked up at us and he said, if you boys are going to ride that train, he said, make sure that you don't get up on that spool of wire, because you'll fall off and get killed. And didn't make us get off. We went on into Pittsburgh. We got into Pittsburgh. We knew we were it's getting dark now, and it's cold, miserable. And here we are with 36 cents on it. And we decided we were going to go back home now, man. This is enough. We're not going to Texas. We've had enough. We tried to catch a freight back out there. And at night, we would see this train coming towards us. We'd think it was a freight. It would be a passenger train going 70 miles an hour. You couldn't tell how fast they were going until they would go by you, you know. Anyhow, we tried and we tried. We couldn't catch nothing. So we slept under a bridge that night with a bunch of other misplaced people. We got cardboard and put over top of us and slept under that bridge. Next morning we got up and we took our 36 cents, went across the bridge into Pittsburgh. And this one guy, he was good at stealing stuff, so he seen milk sitting on people's porches. He would grab a bottle of milk for us. We went up to a store, and we thought, well, we'd buy some something to eat in that store for our 36 cents. And one of the guys went in, and he was in there a little while, and he came back out, and he had a whole basket full of stuff. And I said, how'd you do that? And he said, well, the guy looked at me and said, how many of you are there? And he filled that basket up for it with that 36 cents. And so we ate. Then we came back across, and we decided we were going to hitchhike up Route 51 back to Uniontown into Connellsville. And we get out there, and we can't get a ride with nobody. We tried even to find there was another railroad out there. We was up there standing alongside that railroad, and the guy told me, he said, there won't be a train for another day. He said, it's already went through, the one that went through today, that's it. You know? So we got out there and hitchhiked. An old guy come along in a big old tractor and trailer. I mean, it run about 20 miles an hour. Big machine on the back. He picked us up, and we got in, the two of us. One guy went on. He got mad at us, and he said, I'm going to Texas. And we never seen him again. To this day, I don't know what happened to him. Me and one guy came on home. And we sat in that big old truck, and I was so sleepy and tired. And every once in a while, my old head would go over, and I would lean on the driver, you know, and he would just let me lean on him. After about 4 or 5 hours, we made it to Uniontown. Then we had to hitchhike to Connellsville, and then from Connellsville to Mill Run. Had to walk from Mill Run to home. I got home about midnight that night, and Mom had made a big pot of chili. And she was so glad to see me. I never did it. Oh, I told her, I lied to her. She said, where have you been? I said, well, some guy told us he was going to take us to Pittsburgh, and he took us down there and dumped us off. I didn't tell her we got a freight. And anyhow, I had never tasted anything so good in my life as that chili that night. And I just wanted to see the world. And I still do yet this day. I want to go places, you know. It's in my blood for some reason. I don't know why, but I like to go places, and I wanted to see the big cities. I wanted to live in a big city, and as the war got over, was end of it, just right about the end of it. That's whenever I become 18, and so I knew I was going to have to go. I had taken my physical, and they said, yeah, I was ready to go and everything. They hadn't got everything mopped up yet. Japan was still. Even though they dropped a bomb, they still weren't giving up over there yet that time. The way I got in the Army, me and about 6 or 8 other guys from there around Mill Run went and said we were going to join the Navy. And we went down and we were recruiting office in Connellsville, and I signed up for the Navy, and then we had to go to Pittsburgh. And we got down to Pittsburgh, take our exams. We're all in there going through the exams. The first thing I ran up against was I didn't weigh enough. And they didn't need people in the Navy at that time. That was the problem. They wanted them in the Army. They didn't want them in the Navy. And I'd already passed my physical for the Army. That was the thing. They were ready to induct me in the Army. So as I go through this here, well, the doctor said, "Oh, you don't weigh enough. You only weigh about 100 pounds. You have to weigh 110 or something like that." And he said, "Do you really want to go?" And I said, "Yes, I want to go." And he said, "Okay." So he passed me. Next thing, they checked my teeth, and I had some really bad teeth in the back because I never had them fixed at all. This doctor looked at me and said, "Well, first you don't weigh enough, now you got bad teeth." No, and he rejected me. You can't go. Now, here's my chance to go back home, but I had already had a going away party and all this, and all these other guys are going to the Navy, and here I am. I just walked across the street to the Army recruiting office, and I said, "I've passed my physical exam. Is there any chance that I can go in?" He said, "Man, you're in if you want in." Well, at that time, if he would have said I had to take 30 years, I'd have took 30 years because I just wanted in so bad. I wanted to get away from Mill Run. So I wanted to see the world. That was the main thing. Whenever they decided this Army deal, well, they told me, they said, "You pick what you want." So I picked Germany. I said, "I'll go to ETO." Well, I got in there to be sworn in, and they said, "Friend?" I said, "Yeah." He said, ETO is filled up. We don't need nobody over there now." So he gave me a whole list of where I could go. I looked down there and I seen Alaska. I had no idea that Aleutian Islands was Alaska. And I said, "I'll take Alaska." So that's how I went to New Orleans from a basic, and from there to San Francisco, and then to Seattle, and then took a boat. Drove that boat 30 days. We was on that boat going to Aleutians, and I mean, we stopped at every port in Alaska, and then we got into rough water. I mean, it was terrible. But then I spent a year and a half in Aleutians up there. When I got there, first thing when I got there, the day that I got there, they put me in a way out, nothing else around. They had about 12 huts out there, and it was the quartermaster corps. I had signed up for the transportation. Never had. I took transportation basic, and from then on, I never had any more transportation. I was in the quartermaster corps, which was good because it turned out good. But anyhow, we went. I went to where these other guys had already been there in this hut, and there was like 6 of us in the hut. And I was assigned to my hut and everything. And when it got evening, these guys asked me, they said, "How would you like to go to a movie?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to go to a movie." So we got on, they had a bus. A bus would come up there and pick you up and take you to this movie way out. There must have been, miles between it and where the movie was, where we were out there. Because there was nothing on this island. I mean, this island was just vacant except for these little places that were all around. And so we went to the movies. We watched the movie. When it got time to come out, I lost the guys I was with. I don't have any idea who they were. I didn't know their names. I wouldn't know them if I'd seen them. And they just ran off from me. I come out there and there's about 20 buses sitting out there. And they're already gone. I don't know what bus to get on. I don't know the name of my company. I don't know nothing. And there I stood. And I went up to one of them and said, "I need a ride." And they said, "Where are you going?" "I don't know." "Well, we can't take if you don't, Pretty soon all the buses are gone. I'm out there. This theater is out by itself. Just acres and acres of land, nothing. This theater's sitting out there in the middle of it. There was a Jeep there. Next thing I know, whoever was running that theater, he got in a Jeep and he took off. There I stand. I'm out there. My first night on ADAC. I don't know nothing. I don't know the name of my company. I don't know nothing. And I'm out there. And all I could do is pray to God. I said, "Man, help me somehow. I don't know what to do, I'll walk for miles if I knew where I was going, but I didn't know even what way I got there. So I seen this road. I started walking, and I walked for miles. I came to roads that went like this. Now which way do I go? I had no idea. I just stood there, and I did some more praying. Believe me, I believe in prayer. And pretty soon I seen a Jeep coming down from way off. I could see the lights coming. Now this is about midnight by now, see. This Jeep come up there to this crossroads, and I flagged him down. Man, I'm not letting this thing get away from me. 2 lieutenants in it. What's going on, soldier? Well, I'm lost. Well, where do you want to go? I don't know. I just got here today. I don't know the name of my company. Oh, brother, you know. Well, I said, you know what? I remember they said that there's a laundry attached to this service unit that I've got, but it wasn't where I was at, but there is a laundry attached. Well, we know where the laundry's at. So they took me, we drove for miles and miles and finally come to this laundry. CQ was there in the office there, and I went in and I said, I don't know if I'm in the right place or not. All I know is I'm attached to this laundry. Oh, he said, you're in the quartermaster. He said, that's about 5 miles down over the hill, but you got to go clear back down around to get to it. So I went back out and I told him, I said, they told me I'm in the 220 quartermaster. Oh, man, we know where that's at. I got in the back. They don't say a word to me. They just sit up there and talk to each other. They took me clear back down around and back into there. I got up in there and I said, this is it. I recognize the place. I said, sirs, I don't know how to thank you. I said, you're a godsend, you know. And they said, well, soldiers, just learn where you're at and learn and don't ever do this again. They let me out. I went into the hut and these guys said, where you been? I said, I can't even explain where I've been. But, you know, when I got to know the island then, well, you know, it would have been simple. Had I known where I was at, it might have been a 20-mile walk, but I could have walked it. But you talk about a mess. Oh, the first year wasn't too bad. I kind of, you know, was getting used to it. I started going to church, and this chaplain took a liking to me, and his assistant, which was a staff sergeant, which I didn't have nothing at the time. I was just a private. And the staff sergeant come up to me and said, how would you like to take my place? He said, I'm going home. Well, I had went to the United States Armed Forces Institute there, and I had taken up typing. I could type, and also I got my GED through them. Now, I'm running this whole warehouse as a private, knowing nothing, no stripes or nothing. And yet running this whole thing. I mean, I was in charge of a warehouse, big warehouse, had guys underneath me. The major came down and he talked to the captain in charge there. He finally, the major came out and said, Eddie, he said, we got a problem. And I said, what? He said, he won't let you go. I said, he won't let me go. And he said, no. He said, you're so important here that he said, they absolutely cannot let you go. But he said, you know what? You're going to get some ratings. 1 week later, I got to be a PFC. About a month later, I got a technician 5th grade. And a month later, I got to be a sergeant. And as time went on, you know, you hear all these people saying, boy, you're going to get rock happy, you know. And the thing was, I was in my prime, right? 18, 19 years old. And here you are, you're up there. There's no girls. You never seen a girl no time. The highlight of the whole time was one time, while I was working in this store, the airplane landed there, brought in USO troops, and one of the stewardess come in there and one of the boots fit. She had a real short skirt on, and I'm fitting them boots on her, and that was the highlight of my whole time. Everybody said, oh man, how did you handle that? I said, well, it was hard, but I handled it. I came back to Seattle. I was there at a replacement center there, and then they gave me a 30-day delay en route. And while in Seattle, I had a good time in Seattle. I met some girls there, one girl especially, and I'd met there, and I rented a car. I had all this money because they had sold my car. Mom had sold my car while I was in there, and I had all this money in the bank, so I just sent home for couple $100, and I spent it while I was there, you know. And I rented a car, and I was there about 30 days in Seattle, and then they gave me a 30-day delay en route. But you had to ride this train. I rode these trains all everywhere, you know, that you had to go. This time, after 30 days, I went to Fort Bragg. I got down there, and whenever I rode the train into Fort Bragg, and they told me to call Give me a number to call to have somebody come get me. Staff car pulled up with a guy, young kid driving it. He looked around and put me in the car and took me down, and I got assigned to, I was the supply sergeant down there. And later on I seen this kid, and he said, man, I come up there and I looked at this little guy with them big sergeant stripes, and I thought, boy, you must be somebody. Send a staff car for you. I got discharged in Fort Bragg. The way I got started driving truck was I came home from the Army, and Bill Mayo, which was a good friend of mine, the way I had met him, I had bought, after I had quit high school, I had bought a 36 Ford convertible, and it was a real nice old car. And I used to run behind the school bus every once in a while just so the girls could see me in the evening, you know, and make a big hit with myself. And Bill rode this school bus a few times, and he got to know me, and he wanted to be a friend of mine. His dad had a lot of money. His dad was the superintendent of the mines in Melcroft, Pennsylvania. So Bill got to be my friend, and I would run around with him. And he always had a beautiful car, all kinds of beautiful cars, and I liked that part of him. And when I got home from the Army, I went up to see him, and he said, I just wrecked my car. He had a new Mercury convertible, and he said, I just wrecked it. It's down in Wilkinsburg being fixed up. He said, we got to go down and get it. So we went down there, somebody took us down, and we picked up his car, and we brought it home. And on the way home, he told me, he said, I've got some trucks now. He said, I got one, I'm going to buy another one. And he said, how would you like to drive one of them? And I said, oh man, I'd love to drive a truck, but I said, I don't know that much about them, you know. And he said, well, you don't have to know nothing about them. I'll teach you what to do, you know. So as we're going up the road, the turnpike, we meet one of his trucks. We come up behind one of his trucks bobtailing up there. And he said, oh, there's my truck now. And he pulled him over, and it was Fuzzy Fosbrink. That's when I met Fuzzy. And his dad, he had his dad with him. They had dropped a trailer down in Pittsburgh and were bobtailing home. And Bill said, you guys take my car, me and Eddie are going to take the truck. We got in there. That truck had, it was a Ford, it was a F6 Ford, a small F6 Ford that he'd had a dump body on. He had taken that off and put a fifth wheel on it, and that's what he was pulling these trailers with. It had a 5-speed transmission, a 2-speed rear axle, and a 3-speed auxiliary transmission, which ended up having about 36 gears. And I looked at all of them and I said, Bill, there's no way I can drive it. He said, you can drive it. He said, there's no problem, you can drive it. So we went on home with that. The next trip out, he told me, he said, you go with Fuzzy, and he'll teach you how to drive this truck. I went with him, and we went out into Ohio to deliver Coke syrup, a big load of Coke syrup. First of all, there was no turnpike. The turnpike ended before you got into Pittsburgh. You had to go through Pittsburgh. The only way, I had to learn Pittsburgh all over, and I never knew Pittsburgh at all. And I had to learn how to get through Pittsburgh and then go on out through West Virginia and get into Ohio. And Fuzzy and me went out there, and that old truck, I mean, it would down in the low gears every hill, and then the brakes going down the other side would get hot, and oh, it was a mess. But anyhow, we took our turns. He let me drive, and he'd lay his head down, and I'd lay my head down, and we finally got to Ohio and back. And then Bill ordered an F8 Ford, which was one of the big Fords at that time, and it had a sleeper on it. He put a sleeper on it. He did it, and he put everything on it. It had spotlights, horns, you name it, it had it all on there. You know, it's a beautiful old truck. Everybody'd see it and say, oh my God, where did you get that thing? You know, that's a truck. And that's how I got to driving. And Fuzzy drove the F8 then, and I drove that little F6. Well, that F6 Ford was so small, it had small tires on and everything. The trailer was bigger, and the trailer run downhill all the time. The trailer was up higher in the back than it was in the front. And one guy, it would run 100 mile an hour if you wanted to run it. It just no top speed at all. When you got it in overdrive and all them gears, it would run 100 mile an hour. And out there on that turnpike, you could run almost that high. And because they didn't have any cops on the turnpike that time. They just let you run as fast as you could want to run. And the one guy told me one time, he said, That is the fastest truck I ever seen. And I know why it runs so fast, because the trailer's running downhill all the time. But anyhow, and this was kind of a, wonder if Fuzzy ever stayed with me, because Bill let him go and he put me on that F8 Ford. Then after a little while, Bill told Fuzzy, "Well, I'm gonna put Eddie on there, you know." But I didn't make no money. I mean, we partied all the time. Bill would say, "Now, Dad wants me to get these trucks out of here." At this time, then he bought a couple more. He said, Dad wants me to get these trucks. He just don't want them sitting around here. He wants them being on the road. But he said, all we got to do is take them up here to the turnpike and park them, and then we can go party. So that's what we would do. We'd take, we'd let on like we were going to head on a trip somewhere. Bill would pick me up and we'd go party somewhere, But I worked for him probably up to the time that I met Marie, and she seen it. I wasn't making any money. And she kept saying, well, I don't know why you work for him at all, why? But it was more just fun for me than anything else. And finally, by the time that I quit him, I owed him about $500 because he would just give me money anytime I wanted it, If I wanted to buy something, he'd give me the money. And I ended up not making any money at all. But anyhow, at that time I could get $52 a week for 20 weeks from the Army, after being out of the Army. So I did this, and I worked in his garage. I worked in it then for the time that I was drawing that and paid back that money. And that's how I paid him back. And then that's whenever, after that, Maria and I got married, and she said, you're going to get away from this guy because you're not making no money. So that's when I went to Ohio. By meeting Fuzzy there, he had a lot to do in our life, because I met him there, and after we got to running trucks together, he asked me, he said, did you ever go into Ohio? So we went in there this one time, and we took I had a 42 Buick convertible and had the top down, and we parked the hotel there, and this girl come out and wanted to know if I would take Herbie Kurtz, or his dad ran a hotel, to Connellsville. And I said, yeah, I'll take him down. Well, Marie and her were together. They were standing there talking together, and she invited Marie to go. So she got in the back with Herbie, and Fuzzy and me and Marie sat in the front. But anyhow, we went to Connellsville, and on the way back, Marie got cold, so I gave her my sweater. And I left her out at home, and she didn't take the sweater off. So I had to go back and get my sweater. And as a result, I just kept going back. And that's how I met her. And then I went to Ohio. I went to Ohio and I went to this General Industries. I had come home from working in Elyria, Ohio, and it was on a weekend, and she was staying with my mother and dad because Mom had pneumonia, and she was in bed, and Marie was out there cooking, and I couldn't get back to Elyria for a while. And at this time, I decided, you know what, I'm going to marry this girl if she'll have me. I had gone with Homer Kern to Maryland for him to get married, to get his license, and I told Homer, go with me and I'm going to go get a marriage license. So I went in to Marie's place, and the first thing I did, I walked in and I said, I want your name and your birth date. And so she, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go get a marriage license. And she was fine with that. So Homer and I went and got to put in for the marriage license. Then we had to wait like a week before we could go get married. So then we went the next week, Marie and I went and got married at a church there in Cumberland, Maryland. And we came back, and Homer and his wife took us on our honeymoon. And we went to Somerset, PA, and they bought us a motel. We didn't have no money. I had to borrow $5 off my brother to go to Maryland with. And we stayed there that night. Then we headed for Elyria. As soon as Marie came out, that's when Bill and Mac come out to see us. And Bill said, I'm buying a new auto car. And I want you to drive it. I wanted to do it, but I had this job. Well, it wasn't about 2 weeks later that they told me, they said, you're going to be laid off or going to reduction in force. And we come back to Pennsylvania, and that's when I started working for Mayo again. And this was the bad part of it. I had these trailers that had a tarp up on the top. Now these were like 7-foot sides on each side, and they had bows in the roof that held the tarp up there. These bows went down on each side, down in the side of the trailer, about a foot. And you had to pound them up out. Then I had to climb the sides and roll that tarp. Either way, if I'm putting it on or taking it off, I had to climb the sides, every bow, up the side and straddle the side while I roll the tarp or take the bows out, or put them back in. And I mean, that kept you healthy and lean. And that's what I did for a lot of years, was when we was hauling steel or whatever we were hauling, taking those tarps off and putting them back on. But when they're empty, you had to climb them sides, and they're smooth sides. You had to run up and grab the top and pull yourself up about every bow to put a bow in or take it out, I mean, it was hard work. And then after you did this all day long, then you got in the thing and you drove to New York City that night, before you got in New York City, wait to pick up what they called a city man, a guy that had a union. If you didn't have a union man with you, you couldn't unload New York City. So he'd get in and he would ride with you in there and tell you where to go. Then whenever I had come back to start driving for Mayo again, well, we come back and we stayed at the farm. And this is whenever she was pregnant for Michael. And she went to Confluence and had Michael there while I was back and forth. What happened the night that he was born, or I guess it was a couple of days before, because she was in the hospital for a couple of days, we were at a drive-in movie. And I had this 50 Ford convertible. And we were sitting in this drive-in movie, and she said, oh, I think my water just broke. So we started out there to go to the hospital at Confluence. We had a flat tire. And I'm all excited because she said, don't worry about it. I don't think I'm going to have him yet. And I had to fix the tire and put it on, and then we went on to the hospital. Well, she was in the hospital I think a day or two before Michael was born. But her dad and I sat out in the park, and whenever they told us he was born, we were in it. And this was the greatest day of my life when I held this little boy. It was really something. I couldn't believe it. I've got a son. Anyhow, then I had quit Mayo, went to work for Collinsville Building Works, and what I did there was I would drive their tractor and trailer to Cumberland, Maryland. I would take empty cases of beer bottles down there, pick up I would haul 700 cases of beer and 10 half barrels and 2 full barrels of beer. And I'd bring them back about once a week. I would go on that. And after I would have to load the trailer with the empties, and I'd go down to Cumberland, I unloaded them, and then loaded back up again with full beer, and then drive home. And then the next day, I delivered. Whenever I wasn't driving that trailer, I delivered around town or wherever, at all the bars. And I did this for quite a while, I suppose for close to a year. And I made $65 a week. And I was on call 24 hours a day. If they needed, some bar needed beer, they'd call me, because we lived right next door to the bottling plant. And if anybody needed anything, they'd call me. And I worked for them for about a year. And during that time, I had sold my Ford convertible, and I took a Pontiac 2-door sedan in on trade on it. And this Pontiac set too high in the back. So I decided to put lowering blocks on it. They had a little garage. I had a little garage there. I put the bumper jack underneath the bumper. We got in there. Thank God I left the wheel on. If I'd have had the wheel off, I'd be dead. But I left the wheel on, and I took the axle apart from the spring, put this lowering blocks on, and that jack gave away. It gave. I was pulling on a nut to try to get it loose, and that jack gave way, and that car came down, and I'm underneath. I'm underneath it, and it crushed me between it on my shoulders. I was laying on my side, and it crushed my shoulders together, and I broke my collarbone. Fuzzy had started to work for Motor Cargo, and he said, "Why don't you start to work for Motor Cargo?" He said, "You can make a lot of good money there, you know." And I said, "Oh man, I'm driving this big truck, and they got just them little small trucks, you know." And he said, "Yeah, but boy, you'll make money." So we pulled into Motor Cargo. Well, I said, "Well, I've had an application in here for a long time. Haven't I been called, you know?" And he said, "Well, let me look at you." And he looked down there and he said, "Well, there's a guy here by the name of Mostowski that hasn't given you any reference." I said, "Well, that's who I'm." And we could look out the window. I said, "See that big auto car sitting out there?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I see that." And I said, "He's out there in that thing right now. And if you want me to, I'll bring him in here." He said, "You drive that thing?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "If you can drive that, you can drive anything we got here." He said, "You come to work for us." Went home then, and I was going to make one more trip. That Sunday night I left, was going to go to New York City. I got up on the turnpike to Bedford, Pennsylvania, and they have a big midway service area there. I pulled in there, was going to get a cup of coffee. I was tired, been up all day. I went in, and when I was in there, it rained. I mean, and bucketfuls out there. Well, I had parked in this parking lot out there, which truck drivers can make the worst mess in a parking lot you ever seen. I mean, there was no lines or anything. You just parked wherever you could park and try to find a way out of it then. And I was only going to be in there for 5 minutes. Well, I sat in there, and I sat in there waiting for that rain to stop, and I got to talking to somebody else, and I'm in there maybe for an hour and a half before the rain stopped. I couldn't get to my truck. It was just that raining that hard. I was way off on, a long way to walk. I went out of there and walked up to my truck. Now this thing had an air emergency brake. Nowadays, this won't happen because if your air runs off your truck now, your brake's set up. But at that time, they didn't. If your air run out, you was gone. It just takes off. This had an air emergency brake even. I come out, and where I made a mistake, I pushed in the clutch and took it out of gear to start it. And it started rolling. I got no air. I hurried up and got the motor started, and I've got it floored, trying to get it going. But boy, that thing is going, and I have to find my way out of that. There's trucks parked everywhere. I'm going this way. It's picking up speed. I'm going downhill. I'm heading for a police barracks, state police barracks, right in front of me. And I thought, man, I can't do this. I can't go into that police barracks. I seen a place where they greased trucks. It had a big well there where they greased trucks and I see I can't make the turn because my trailer would not make the turn. I could get the tractor across, but the trailer would go in it, see? And thinking fast of what to do. I mean, I still haven't got no air. I can't get this air built up, and I'm just going between trucks. And finally, I seen where I could straddle a little wall there that was up in front of where these police barracks were, and I could ride it out, and maybe the trailer would go across that pit. I don't know for sure. I thought it might. I got 2 wheels over that wall, and I started out across that. Well, it slid on that wall, and it stopped. The trailer was this far from going down in that pit. The trailer is not, I hadn't hurt nothing. I hadn't hit a thing. It was just sitting there. Now, how do I get off of this wall, and how do I get that trailer back out, see? Because I can't go forward. I can't back up. I'm on this wall. I called Walter Mostowski. The guy that owned the truck was in Detroit. I called Walter, who lived in Normalville and had his business over. He had a lumber business there. He brought him and his wife and brought a straight truck and all kinds of, I told him to bring ties and stuff where we could board up to get this trailer over that thing. And got George and his wife, and they all came up. Now, It raining. I mean, it just rained all night then, till about 3 o'clock in the morning till they got there. Meantime, it's raining so hard. Here come another truck down through heading for that police barracks, but they had a trench built down there. It went in that trench and turned over before it hit that police barracks. Now this is where these policemen slip. It turned over, and we said nobody has bothered us. Nobody's paid any attention to us so far. See, because we haven't we didn't talk to nobody. Police didn't even come around or nothing. Anyhow, when he got down there, I said, "Well, let's go down and see if he's got hurt." We went down. We climbed up on top and opened up the door, and he's down in there. He's walking around on the other window down there, you know. I said, "Are you hurt?" "No." Oh, I said, "Are you going to get out?" He said, "I can't find my shoes." He said, "I was asleep in there." He was asleep in it, and it ran off. And boy, we could smell whiskey. And I said, "If you got whiskey in here, you better get rid of it, because there's a police barracks right down there, and they're going to be coming up here." He said, "Hell, the whole trailer's loaded with whiskey." We parked the trailer. I said, "I'm not going through today." I said, I'm done, you know. I said, "I've worked too hard. I'm not going to New York now." And I got home, and Motor Cargo had called and said, "Get your butt out here. We will need you right now." So I thought, well, hey, I've got a job now. So I just called Frank, and I told him, I said, "Your truck is sitting up there. It's got no dollies on it, but it's sitting there ready to go to New York City. Aren't you going to take it?" I said, "No, I quit. I'm done. I ain't touching that truck again." But that's when I went to work for Motor Cargo then. And I went out there. I had to take it. I had a 49 Buick, a real nice 49 Buick Roadmaster. While I was driving for this auto car, I didn't make enough money that I finally let the guy have the 49 Buick. I took a 39 Buick that he had, and he took the 49 and paid it off, and he took it. I turned around. At this time, they paid you cash for every trip. When you come back, you went in, and the guy gave you the money, you know, paid you in cash. And I walked in there, and I had been gone like for 12 hours, and he paid me like $75. I had never made so much money in my life. I thought, I don't care what I drive, man. This is my job, you know. And I told Marie, I said, "We got money for the first time in our life. We got money, you know." And I had to live in Akron, where she's still living in Pennsylvania. We did that for about a year. I had to stay in a hotel in Akron. But the next trip then, I was sitting there waiting to go home on the weekend, right before Christmas, 2 or 3 days before Christmas. And I walked in. They said, "Friend, your truck's ready." And I said, "Okay." He said, "You're going to St. Paul, Minnesota." I said, "St. Paul? I run east." He said, this dispatcher said, "If you're going to work here, you're going to go where we send you." So I went to St. Paul in that old Ford. It was so cold, right around Christmas time, 20 below zero in places. The old heater wouldn't work. The windshield would frost up. You couldn't see out. I finally took the defroster hoses down and stuck them up my pant legs to keep from freezing. That's how I I got up there and got in there, and we slept over top of a gas station. They had a dormitory up there where we slept, and that's how I slept that time. Had to take 2 breaks going up, 2 8-hour breaks to get there. And that was all in dormitory places. And there were stinking truck drivers and snorers, and oh man, what a deal. But I'm making money. And they got me home for Christmas. They got back, and they put me on another broker truck. This guy, it was a Dutchman, he said, "You drive for me," and he said, "My trucks run east." He said, "You'll take a break every time you go through there. You'll be at home a lot, you know." So I said, "Good, I'll do that." And he bought me new trucks, and I worked for him till CF bought them out. And they all went that's whenever I started driving a company truck, and that's when I finally got a diesel after that. Up to that time, they never bought no diesels. They bought all gas jobs. You had to know how to drive a diesel then, you know. It wasn't, anybody can drive a diesel, but they didn't think so then. You had to have experience to drive a diesel. He got me a new V8 International, And these V8 Internationals, you talk about something that would run. Oh my God. They would just outrun anything on that highway, and that's the way we ran. I mean, we run 80, 85 mile an hour all the time, and just hauled that freight like you wouldn't believe it was anything on it. Now, what made it bad driving these brokers' trucks, like I would go to Chicago, and I would lay there all week waiting to get this trailer loaded. These company drivers would make 2 and 3 trips in there. But after I was there 10 hours, I got paid $8 for laying there sleeping. And then 8 hours off, another 8 hours on. I'd made money all week just laying there. But it got monotonous, you know. I'd rather been out there hauling freight. CF had these big Freightliners. And man, whenever I heard they was going to buy us out, 1960, they started the negotiations, you know, probably about 58 or 59. I thought, oh man, I can't wait to get a hold of one of them Freightliners, you know. When they brought them first trucks in, they were junk. They were trucks that people said were sitting out there in Portland junked, and they brought them in for us to run, you know. Motor Cargo had bought a bunch, same way with CF, bought a bunch of other outfits. And you had other outfit trucks that you drove. You know, they put their sign on it. But you might have a Mack, you might have an International, you might have. I drove every truck there was. And this one time I went into Chicago, and I took one of the CF trucks, or one of the Motor Cargo trucks in there. When I got ready to leave, they said, "We've got a CF Freightliner for you to take back." Boy, I can't wait to get in this Freightliner. I went out there, and I got up in that thing. That dash has just got instruments of all kinds on it. And I'm looking at that thing, and I thought, I don't know how to start it. It's got no switch key. I'm looking for a switch key. I ain't got no switch key. So there's a guy walking by, and hey, come here. How do you start this thing? He looked up there and he said, "Man, that looks like an airplane to me." So finally I started flipping switches, and here, CF never had switch keys. They just have a switch, flip a switch and go with it, you know. How they didn't have people steal them is beyond me. But I finally flipped that switch and got her started. Man, there ain't no way I'm gonna go back in there and say I don't want to take that truck. I'm gonna drive it one way or another. You know, they never had any pretty trucks. They just used them. Insides were just bare, most of them, you know. Mayo had these trucks leased to Atlantic Freight Line, and then he went to Eastern Freight Line, and you had to be a Teamster to work for them. So that's when I first joined in 1949. And then when I started to just drive over, you know, when I had this one that I was running as my own, I dropped out of Teamsters for a little while. Then when I started for Motor Cargo, I had to go back to the Teamsters again. But all that time, from 49 up to, I think it was 55 or something, that didn't count anyhow. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, you made money. Every year you just went up on wages, and you got paid mileage. And the mileage just kept going up, and it was wonderful. It was a wonderful job, and I wouldn't have traded it for nothing. I really liked it. I know your mother had a lot of times that, you know, raising you kids all by herself and everything, but the money is what meant something to us then. It meant more than anything else. And I spent every minute I could with you, and I know that there's no doubt about it. But, you know, I seen people that had everyday jobs that didn't have no more time than we did because they were both working or they didn't spend no more time together. It just...
So when I was born, you sat out in the park with her dad.
Yeah.
What about when Todd was born?
Okay, the same thing, same very thing. We did the same way with Lyle. Every time we'd go up there, and he'd either go into a bar there somewhere and have a drink or something, and then we'd sit there on them benches in the park and wait for... This one time, I was on the road, and she was having to go, and she held off. She said, "I'm not going till he gets home." and I got home, and she went and had the baby. Yeah, she held off. And now with Jamie, see, Jamie was born in Akron. She's the only one that was born in Akron. The rest of you was all born there. We stayed in in Stowe, Ohio. We stayed in upstairs and she was pregnant for Lyle at the time, and a small little apartment. She could hardly get through the kitchen because she was so big. She opened the refrigerator door and she had to get out of the kitchen. We stayed there then until she got ready to go. We went to Pennsylvania, she had that, and then we come back and we moved into Hudson Drive. Fuzzy and Charlotte had bought over at Delia Estates, and all these drivers were buying over there, and we went over there to buy one over there. We found one that we wanted, and we said we'd go ahead and buy it. And we went to the bank and going through everything, and finally they called us one day and they said, your loan didn't go through. And we said, well, why? We ain't got nothing to keep us from going through. We got a good job. She said, well, after all, you are a truck driver. And that's all she told us, you know. So we're saying, man, oh man, can the truck driver get a loan? What's the deal here? But we went down, we seen this ad in the paper then about down there on where we bought on Pikes Avenue. And we went down there and they were just building them. They were just starting to build them. And we picked out from the model home what one we wanted. And I picked out more than Mom did because I wanted this one with all the gingerbread in front and had pink siding on the back. That wasn't too much for her, but she was glad to do it. And after we moved in there, that's after Jamie was born, and we built a garage and put in a driveway and finished that basement. That basement was really something, and didn't cost much at all at that time. I think $2,500 or something. The reason I moved from Akron, Ohio to Albuquerque for Consolidated, they said they were going to start running a relay out in this part of the country. And they put up on the bulletin board, said anybody that would like to move to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we had seen, I had never run out here, but we had seen Albuquerque, New Mexico for a long time. And we thought, my gosh, that'd be a good place to live because everybody talked about Albuquerque, you know. So what the deal was, they put this list up. They said, sign this list if you want to go to Albuquerque. Everybody, I was not about 115 on the list. The first 114 put their name on it, you know. Oh, everybody wanted to go to Albuquerque. Well, I ain't got a chance. You're only going to send 6 or something like that. So what chance have I got? But I put my name on the bottom anyhow. And here about 2 days before came time to go, well, it was a week before time to go, everybody took their names off, and all of us guys on the bottom got to go, you know. And I come home and told Mom, I said, hey, you know what, we can go to Albuquerque. She said, there ain't no way. And I said, well, it's up to you, but if we want to go, we've got a week to get ready, or 2 weeks maybe, I don't know what it was. And she said, I went to work. I came back from work, she said, let's go. And I said, well, okay. So we put the house up for sale right away and started putting everything together, went and bought a new Buick station wagon, got all your kids together, and came a couple days before us to be out here. We headed for Albuquerque, and the worst part was that dog that Todd had. Marie said, what are we going to do about that dog? And I said, well, we can't take that dog. He was just a little puppy, and Todd had just got him. And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, I'll see if any of the neighbors want him, and we'll just go out here and not say anything to Todd. We'll just give it away the day before we leave. So we got ready to leave and got all packed up, got our trailer loaded, and I took the dog and handed it over the fence to one of the neighbors and came back in, and we got going down the road, and Todd said, where's Socks? Well, Socks ain't with us. We gave him away. That boy cried across 2 states. I mean, he never stopped. He wanted his Socks, and I felt so bad. So that's when we promised that we'd get him another dog when we get out here. After we get out here, we got that dachshund that he said was going to starve to death if we didn't buy him. The minute we get out here to Albuquerque, I wasn't here. We went down here on Manal, and they had that, we was in a truck stop down there at that time. And I no sooner got in there, they said, go home and get ready. You're going on a trip tonight. That's very nice. And they put her in a motel down here, and I had to go out and make a trip to Ash Fork, Arizona. We either went to Ash Fork or Liberal, Kansas. And I made a trip to Ash Fork, Arizona with another guy, Sievert. He drove, and I just rode up there with him, and then I was supposed to sleep on the way out, but I was too busy looking at the scenery because I'd never been out through there before. And then I had to turn around and bring a truck back. As soon as we got up there, he went to bed, and I turned around and brought a truck back. And I could either run Ash Fork or Liberal, but I ran Liberal most of the time. I finally got a bid to run Liberal, right. And I would run Liberal all the time. But I ended up then, when I went to Tucumcari, I was #1 man. But as long as I was here, I think the highest I got was number 2 or 3. I retired in December 1990. Okay, the big part of my life has been my family. I have really enjoyed my family, and I wouldn't change any of it for anything. Everything has been so great. And I've got to mention Jamie here. She has been the love of my life, and just I don't know what we would have done without her. We have just depended on her so much from the time that she was born in Akron, Ohio, and she has just been everything that we wanted, along with all the rest of our boys. They're all such good people, and God only knows how much we appreciate them. And our whole family has been so good. I don't know what we can attribute it to. They just had good upbringing, and they have been good people, and I appreciate it so much. And God has been good to us. I don't know how I got to be 80, but boy, it seemed like it's only been about 30 years ago that I was 30. And I thank God every day for my health, and thank God for my family, and He has stuck with me all these years. We'll do it again next 20 years. Thank you.